All right, thank you guys. It is I, Brock Page, and I'll tell you what, man, I'm feeling great on a Wednesday morning because I went 4-1 in my personal bets yesterday on brockpage.com. And if you want to access all of my personal bets yourself, there's only one way you can do that, and that's to sign up for my board member tier package on brockpage.com. And the link for that package is right in the description section below. Now, we're 2-0 in our last two board member tier package picks on that website. And not only do board members get access to my board member pick, they actually get access to every single bet that I post on that website all the way through the end of January. Now, we're also hitting at 60% our last 11 board member bets in that very same category. And if you're still on the fence about getting a package on brockpage.com, well, we have packages starting at just $1.99, and we currently have ourselves over 860 members who are signed up and active on that site right now. But with that, guys, let's go ahead and dive into some free content. We're going to start off with the Magic taking on the Sixers, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Philadelphia is minus 11.5 with the total at 213. But despite being the double-digit favorite in this one, the Sixers are actually playing just .500 basketball at the Wells Fargo Center, and they're also covering in just 38% of those home contests. Now, Philadelphia has had significant problems rebounding the basketball this season. As a matter of fact, they are currently dead last in the NBA in offensive rebounding at home. And they also find themselves in the bottom 5 in home defensive rebounding as well. Now, they're taking on an Orlando team who successfully covered the number in 5 out of their last 9 outings, with covers over the likes of Charlotte, Washington, and Chicago during that span. As a matter of fact, Orlando is 16-11 against the spread in all of their road games, and they're currently in the top 3 in the NBA in fourth quarter scoring on the road. Now, Cole Anthony, he's averaging over 18.5 points a game, along with 6 boards and 5 assists. Meanwhile, Franz Wagner scoring 15.5 points a night himself, along with 4 rebounds and a couple assists as well. Now, injury-wise, Moore and Carter Williams, they are still out indefinitely. Meanwhile, Wendell Carter, he is also listed as questionable. Meanwhile, for the Sixers, Milton and Thibault, they are still out indefinitely. Meanwhile, Danny Green, he's sitting this one out here tonight with a hip injury. And when it comes to the total in this one, Philadelphia saw overs recently against the likes of Boston, Houston, and this very Orlando team. Meanwhile, the Magic saw 5 out of their last 9 get over the line themselves, throwing out that Portland game. I'm going to lean toward Philadelphia minus 11.5 in the over 213. Next ball game, it is going to be Nets versus the Wizards, 7 o'clock Eastern tip-off. Washington is minus 2 with the total at 231.5. But despite being favored in this one, the Wizards have had significant problems defensively this season. They're currently in the bottom 10 in home points allowed. And they also failed to cover the point spread in 6 out of their last 7 outings at any location. And as good as these guys have been offensively, they really haven't been shooting the 3 ball all that well this year. They're making only 32% of their 3-pointers for the entire season, and that puts them in the bottom 5 in the league in that particular category. Now, they're taking on a Brooklyn club who plays their best basketball on the road. They're 15-5 straight up when traveling, and they're actually leading the entire NBA in road scoring. Now, James Harden's dropping over 22.5 points a game, 8 boards, and double-digit assists for the Beard. Also looks like the refs are starting to give him some more calls. They're putting him to the line a little bit more, which, it's actually his bread and butter. It's where he scored most of his points in his career. So that's a good thing if you're a Brooklyn backer here. Meanwhile, Patty Mills, he's draining 43% of his 3-pointers. He's also scoring over 13 points a game. And of course, speaking of 3-pointers, the Nets are drilling nearly 40% of their shots from 3-land this year when they travel. And when it comes to the injury report, Kevin Durant, he's still out for Brooklyn. Not going to see him in action for some time here. Meanwhile, Millsap and Claxton, they are also out for tonight's game. Now, total-wise, Brooklyn saw 3 out of their last 5 ball games fall under the posted total. They also went 60% to the under in their last 10 meetings with the Wizards, if you're into historical trends. Meanwhile, Washington saw unders recently against Philadelphia, Orlando, and Houston. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Brooklyn +2 in the under 231.5. All right, next ball game, it is going to be Charlotte versus Boston. And that's going to be a 7:30 Eastern tip-off. Boston's -4.5 with a total at 218. The Boston failed to cover in 6 out of their last 9 ball games, and those were failures to cover against the likes of Chicago, Philadelphia, and Indiana during that span. Having said that, though, the Celtics are 15-8 straight up at the Garden, and they play their best basketball in front of their home fans. The Celtics are allowing only 103 points a game in Beantown, and they're also in the top 5 in defensive field goal percentage at home. Jason Tatum scoring 25.5 points a game, along with 8 boards and 3 assists. Meanwhile, Jaylen Brown is scoring over 24 points a night himself, along with 6 rebounds and a couple assists as well. And speaking of offensive production, the Celtics are currently in the top 10 in rebounding on the offensive end of the court. They're taking on a Charlotte club who's certainly exciting to watch, but they allow far too many points per contest. As a matter of fact, the Hornets allow nearly 117 points a game on the road, and they're also in the bottom 3 in defensive rebounding away from home as well. Charlotte's also got themselves a losing record this year when traveling, and they failed to cover in 8 out of their last 10 meetings with the Celtics. Now, injury-wise, LaMelo Ball and Kelly Oubre, LaMelo Ball and Kelly Oubre, they are both questionable to play here this evening. Meanwhile, for Boston, Smart, Williams, and Nesmith, they are listed as questionable for them. And when it comes to the total in this one, Boston went 60% to the over in their last 10 outings, 7-3 to the over in their last 10 against Charlotte. Meanwhile, the Hornets on the other side of things, they saw games with Orlando, Detroit, and Washington get over the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward Boston -4.5 in the over 218. Next matchup, it is going to be Blazers versus the Heat, 7:30 Eastern start time. Miami's -8.5 with the total at 216. Now, the Heat's gone 5-1 straight up in their last 6 outings. And they've also done a real nice job covering the point spread over the past few weeks. As a matter of fact, the Heat's gone 7-2 against the spread in their last 9. And they're also winning 74% of their ball games at the FTX Arena. These guys have been great in South Beach this year. Jimmy Butler scoring over 22 points a game, along with 5 rebounds and 5 assists for Jimmy Buckets. Meanwhile, Tyler Hero's drilling nearly 40% of his 3 balls. He's also averaging over 20.5 points a game. And of course, speaking of 3-pointers, the Heat ranks in the top 3 in the NBA in offensive 3-point percentage. They're taking on a Portland team who's actually the worst in the NBA in guarding the 3-ball themselves. Certainly not a good formula here. You got a great 3-point shooting team against a team who simply can't guard the 3-ball. Now, the Blazers are also letting their opponents connect on nearly 50% of their field goals on the road. And of course, speaking of road trips, the Blazers got the W in only 4 out of 18 away games this year, and they successfully covered the number in just 27% of those contests. Now, injury-wise, Zeller and Nance are out. Powell is doubtful. Meanwhile, for Miami, Lowry and Opala are sitting this one out for them. When it comes to the total in this one, Miami went 70% to the over in their last 10 outings, 7-3 to the over in their last 10 meetings with Portland. Meanwhile, the Blazers saw overs against Washington, Denver, and this very Miami team recently themselves. I'm going to lean toward Miami -8.5 in the over 216. All right, next contest, it is going to be Timberwolves versus the Hawks, 7:30 Eastern tip-off. Atlanta is -2 with the total at 233.5. But despite being favored by a bucket, the Hawks have been pretty bad here recently. They actually lost 5 out of their last 6 ball games, and they successfully covered just once during that span. Now, the Hawks are also 7 games below 500 for the entire season, and they're covering in just 40% of their home games. And of course, speaking of home games, the Hawks are currently in the bottom 5 in the league in defensive field goal percentage in front of their home crowd. Certainly some things to think about here if you're leaning toward Atlanta. Definitely some negative connotations there. But anyway, they're taking on a Minnesota team who does a really nice job of scoring on the road themselves, as they're currently in the top 3 in the league in road scoring. Karl Anthony Towns is averaging 24.5 points a game, along with 9 boards and 3 assists. Meanwhile, Anthony Edwards, he's averaging over 22 points a night, along with 5 boards and 3 assists himself. The Timberwolves got the W in 6 out of their last 8 ball games. Now, when it comes to the injury report in this one, McLaughlin is questionable for Minnesota. Meanwhile, for Atlanta, Bogdanovich and Capella, they are sitting this one out today for them. And when it comes to the scoring in this one, Atlanta saw their last 3 straight get over the posted number. They also went 70% to the over in their last 10. Meanwhile, the Timberwolves, on the other side of things, they saw 7 out of their last 10 get over the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward Minnesota +2 in the over 233.5. All right, next contest I have for you, it is going to be Cavaliers versus the Bulls, and that's going to be an 8 o'clock Eastern tip-off. Cleveland's -1.5 with the total at 218. Now, the Cavs are currently on a 5-game winning streak, and they also allow fewer points per contest on the road than any other team in the NBA. As a matter of fact, the Cavs are giving up just 102 points a game on the road, and they currently find themselves in the top 3 in defensive field goal percentage away from home. These guys have been catapulted by their strong defensive play. Now, when it comes to the scoring in this one, it's Darius Garland who's averaging just about 20 points a game for the Cavaliers, along with 3 rebounds and 7 assists. Meanwhile, Jared Allen is scoring over 16.5 points a night himself, along with double-digit rebounds. And speaking of rebounds, Cleveland's currently in the top 10 in offensive boards when they travel. They're taking on a Chicago team who lost their last 3 straight. They also covered the number in only 3 out of their last 10 ball games. And the Bulls are also going to work here tonight without the efforts of Zach LaVine and Lonzo Ball. Both of those guys are battling knee injuries. So once again, you're not going to see those guys in action here tonight. But I'll tell you this much, even when they're mostly healthy, we're still looking at a Chicago team who isn't entirely crisp on the defensive end of the court. Chicago currently finds themselves in the bottom 5 in guarding the 3 ball at home. And they're also in the bottom 10 in home defensive field goal percentage as well. Now, when it comes to the injury report in this one, once again, LaVine and Ball, they're out. Now, keep an eye on Caruso and Cook. They're both listed as questionable as well for Chicago. Meanwhile, for the Cavs, on the other side of things, Rondo and Stevens, they are out for them. And, of course, when it comes to the number in this one, Cleveland went 6-2 to the under in their last 8 outings. They're also 14-10 to the under when traveling this season. Meanwhile, the Bulls, on the other side of things, they saw unders recently against Memphis, Dallas, and Orlando. They also went 60% to the under in their last 10 meetings with Cleveland. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward the Cavs, -1.5, and the under 218. Next matchup, it is going to be Grizzlies versus the Bucks, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. Milwaukee's -7 with the total at 225.5. Now the Bucks are 14-8 straight up at the Fiserv Forum. And they've done a pretty nice job of scoring points at home. Having said that, though, these guys have really played quite poorly here recently. They lost 6 out of their last 8 ball games, and they successfully covered the point spread only twice during that stretch. So although Milwaukee's been good in many different spots, you may want to think about what I just told you there. Now, elaborating more on the covering aspect here, the Bucks covered the point spread in only 36% of their games at the Fiserv Forum this year. And they also find themselves in the bottom 10 in defensive rebounding in front of their home fans. Now they're taking on a Memphis club who leads the entire NBA in offensive rebounding themselves. So it definitely looks like the Grizzlies should end up winning the battle underneath the boards here. We're looking at arguably the best rebounding team in all of the NBA. Now the Red Hot Grizzlies also won 12 out of their last 13, and they covered the number in 85% of those ball games. These guys have been cashing in a lot of tickets for their backers, for their bettors here recently. Now John Morant scoring over 24 points per contest, 5 rebounds, 6 assists for Ja. Meanwhile, Jaren Jackson is scoring over 16 points a night himself, along with 5 boards as well. The Grizzlies are covering in 75% of their contests on the road this year. They're also in the top 3 in the league in defensive rebounding away from home. Like I just said a few moments ago, this is arguably the best rebounding team in basketball. Certainly one of the best rebounding teams in the West. Now, injury-wise, Brooks and Bane, they are in quarantine for the Grizzlies. Not going to see those guys in action. Meanwhile, for Milwaukee on the other side, Lopez is out for them. Holiday is questionable. When it comes to the total in this one, Milwaukee went 6-2 to the under in their last 8 outings. 14-8 to the under at the Fiserv Forum this year as well. Meanwhile, Memphis went 70% to the under in their last 10 themselves. I'm going to lean toward Memphis plus 7 in the under 225.5. All right, next ball game, it is going to be Thunder versus the Spurs, 8:30 Eastern start time. San Antonio's minus 6.5 with the total at 219. Now, the Spurs have had a pretty rough stretch of games here recently, and they've also struggled with San Antonio in recent meetings. Having said that, though, we are looking at a Spurs team who, believe it or not, they score a ton of points at home this year. As a matter of fact, San Antonio, they're in the top 3 in the NBA in scoring on average per game at home. San Antonio is also in the top 5 in home offensive field goal percentage. DeJounte Murray scoring nearly 20 points a game, along with 8 boards and 8 assists. Meanwhile, Keldon Johnson is drilling over 44% of his 3 balls. He's also averaging 14 points a game. They're taking on a Thunder team who's dead last in the NBA in defensive rebounding on the road. Meanwhile, offensively, OKC scores fewer points per contest than any other team in the association. The Thunder took the loss in 9 out of their last 11 ball games. And they're also connecting on just 29% of their three-pointers when they travel. I don't know. I think I might be able to connect on 29% of my three-pointers. Don't challenge me, though. I'm not going to go out there and prove it and then record myself shooting three-pointers at the playground. But anyway, injury-wise, Williams and Krejci, they are still out for OKC. Meanwhile, for San Antonio, Collins and Jones, they are still out for them. Now, total-wise, the Spurs are 16-5 to the over at the AT&T Center. And that's good for over 76% in that particular category. Meanwhile, OKC saw 4 out of their last 6 get over the posted total themselves. I'm going to lean towards San Antonio minus 6.5 in the over 219. Next contest, Raptors, Mavericks, 8:30 East. Dallas is minus 4.5 with the total at 206. But despite being favored in this one, the Mavs have a losing record against the spread at home this year, and they've really lacked offensively this season. Dallas is currently in the bottom 10 in shooting from the field at home, and they're also in the bottom 5 in home offensive rebounding. As a matter of fact, the Mavs score only 105 points a game at any location. They're taking on a Toronto team who won 7 out of their last 10, despite their recent skid. Now, Toronto also really puts down the clamps late in games this season. They're leading the NBA in fewest third-quarter points allowed on the road. Now, they also find themselves in the top 10 in fewest fourth-quarter points allowed on the road as well. So we're looking at some pretty good defensive trends there. Now, offensively, when it comes to the scoring, Freddie VanVleet, he's averaging nearly 22 points a game, along with 4 boards and 6 assists. Meanwhile, Pascal Siakam, he's averaging 21 points a night himself, along with 8 rebounds and 5 assists as well. Now, injury-wise, Birch is out. Trent is questionable. Meanwhile, for Dallas, Bullock and Kleba are questionable for them. When it comes to the total in this one, Toronto saw 5 out of their last 9 get over the line, throwing out that Miami game. Toronto also finds themselves 10-8 to the over when they travel. I'm going to lean toward Toronto plus 4.5 in the over 206. Next contest, Rockets, Jazz, 9 o'clock East. Utah is minus 12 with the total at 231.5. Now the Jazz are going to work here today without Hassan Whiteside and Donovan Mitchell. Mitchell's currently in concussion protocols. The Jazz also lost 5 out of their last 6 ball games, and they successfully covered the number only once during that stretch. So as good as these guys have been here this year, more recently, these guys are struggling. They are human. And like I just said, as good as these guys have been on both ends of the court this year, they have struggled defensively in the beginning of the second half. I know that sounds weird, but just hear me out. Utah currently finds themselves in the bottom 5 in third quarter points allowed at home. Kind of a quirky stat there, but if you're into prop betting, certainly want to think about that one there. And equally as bad to what I just told you there, the Jazz also find themselves in the bottom 10 in second quarter points allowed in front of their home crowd as well. So there are some holes in this Utah, defensive effort. Now they're taking on a Houston club who got the W in 2 out of their last 3 ball games, with victories over the likes of Sacramento and San Antonio. Now the Rockets also have themselves a winning record against the spread on the road, and they're currently in the top 3 in fourth quarter scoring away from home. Christian Wood is scoring over 17.5 points a game, along with double-digit rebounds. Meanwhile, Eric Gordon's been lights out from three-land this year. He's drilling 46% of his shots from beyond the arc. He's also averaging nearly 15 points a game. You don't hear a lot of guys talking about Igor just because he's on such a bad team. But this guy's dangerous shooting from three-land. Now, injury-wise, the Rockets are pretty much healthy to go here tonight. Obviously, John Wall's still out indefinitely. But as far as everybody else, looks like the entire roster is ready to go. Meanwhile, for Utah on the other side, once again, Whiteside and Mitchell, they are out for them. And when it comes to the scoring in this one, Utah went 60% to the over in their last 10 outings, 14-8 to the over at the Vivint Arena. Meanwhile, Houston went 70% to the over in their last 10 ball games themselves. I'm going to lean toward Houston plus 12 and the over 231.5. Next contest, it is going to be Pistons versus the Kings, and that's going to be a 10 o'clock Eastern tip-off. Sacramento is minus 5.5 with the total at 222. Now, the Kings covered the number in 3 out of their last 4 ball games, and they're doing a pretty nice job of scoring early in games. Sacramento is currently in the top 5 in second quarter scoring, and they're led by De'Aaron Fox, who's averaging over 20.5 points a night, along with 3 boards and 5 assists. Meanwhile, Harrison Barnes is drilling 42% of his three-pointers. He's also averaging 16 points a game. Now they're taking on a Pistons squad who's a league worst 3-19 straight up on the road, and they're scoring fewer points per contest away from home than any other team in basketball. No real surprise there. Meanwhile, defensively, the Pistons are letting their opponents make nearly 50% of their field goals against them when they travel as well. I mean, with that particular stat in mind, it's no wonder they've won just 3 road games this year. But anyway, injury-wise, Jackson and Hayes, they are questionable. Jeremy Grant, he's still out indefinitely with a thumb. I really have no idea when he's coming back. If I were him, I would just sit out for the rest of the season. But anyway, well, yeah, you still get paid, right? Anyway, I guess it depends on what's in the contract. I think you get paid if you're hurt. But anyway, total-wise, Detroit 6-3 to the under in their last 9 ball games, 60% to the under in their last 10 gatherings with Sacramento. Meanwhile, the Kings are 16-11 to the under at the Golden One Center this season. I'm going to lean towards Sacramento minus 5.5 and the under 222. Next ball game, it is going to be Clippers versus the Nuggets, 10 o'clock East. Denver's minus 7.5 with the total at 212. Now, the Nuggets are one of the better defensive teams in the West. They're currently in the top 10 in the entire NBA in guarding the 3 ball. and they're allowing only 104 points a night at home. Now, when it comes to rebounding in this one, Denver's in the top 10 in defensive boards per game. Now, scoring-wise, Nikola Jokic is averaging over 25 points a night, along with 11 rebounds and 7 assists. Meanwhile, Will Barton is scoring over 15 points a game himself, along with 4 boards and 4 assists as well. Now, Denver's currently in the top 10 in offensive field goal percentage. They're taking on a Clipper team who lost 5 out of their last 8, and they actually play their worst basketball on the road. Now, the Clippers are scoring only 102 points a game when traveling. They also find themselves in the bottom 5 in road offensive rebounding. And of course, speaking of boards, the Clippers find themselves in the bottom 3 in defensive rebounding as well. And when it comes to the injury report, Preston is out. Kennard is questionable. Meanwhile, for Denver on the other side, Rivers is questionable. Bol and Murray are still out for them. When it comes to the number in this one, Denver saw 9 out of their last 10 meetings with Los Angeles fall under the line. So if you're into historical trends, think about that one there. Meanwhile, the Nuggets are 12-6 of the under on the road this year. That's good for nearly 70% in that category. I'm going to lean toward Denver, -7.5, and the under 212. And with that, guys, we're going to jump into our next and final matchup of the show. It is going to be Pacers versus the Lakers. That's going to be a 10:30 Eastern start time. LA is -4.5 with the total at 223. As much as they've struggled here recently, the Lakers have done a nice job of scoring points this season. These guys have been pretty good offensively. They're averaging over 113 points a game at the Crypto Center, and they're actually in the top 10 in the NBA in offensive field goal percentage. Now, LeBron James is scoring over 28.5 points a night, along with 7 boards and 6 assists. Meanwhile, Russell Westbrook, he's scoring over 18.5 points a game, along with 8 rebounds and 7 assists as well. The Lakers are currently 15-11 straight up in front of their home fans. They're taking on a Pacer team who got the W in only 3 out of 17 road games. And we just talked about this earlier, but they are currently tied with the Pistons for fewest road wins in the entire NBA. These guys have been awful when traveling. The Pacers are scoring just 104 points a game on the road, and they're currently in the bottom 5 in shooting the 3-ball when traveling. Now, injury-wise, really bad news for Pacer fans here. Brogdon and Lamb, they are questionable. Meanwhile, for the Lakers, AD is still out, and definitely Carmelo Anthony, he's questionable as well. When it comes to the total in this one, Indiana's 13-7 to the under when they travel. They're also 60% to the under in their last 10 meetings with Los Angeles. Meanwhile, the Lakers, on the other side of things, they saw contests recently with Utah, Minnesota, and Memphis fall under the posted number themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Lakers, -4.5, and the under 223. And with that, guys, we're going to go ahead and jump into our quick pick recap. Powered to you by my website at brockpage.com. Where we are currently 2-0 in our last 2 board member tier package picks. I like Philadelphia -11.5 over 213. Brooklyn +2 under 231 and a hook. Boston -4.5 over 218. Miami Heat -8.5 over 216. Minnesota +2 over 233 and a half. Cleveland -1.5 under 218. Memphis -7 under 225 and a hook. San Antonio -6.5 over 219. Toronto +4.5 over 206. Houston +12 over 231 and a hook. Sacramento -5.5 under 222. Denver -7.5 under 212. And before I give you my next and final free pick for the video, one final reminder that I went 4-1 in my 5 premium sports picks on brockpage.com yesterday. I know I sound like I'm bragging and gloating, but it's been long overdue. Feels good to get a nice winning day, especially in that fashion, 4-1. But anyway, for my next and final free pick, I'm going to lean toward the LA Lakers -4.5 and the under 223. And with that, guys, we're going to go ahead and jump into our shout out of the day. Haven't done that in a while, so let's go ahead and dive into it. And today's shout out of the day, that's going to go to Sean Gregory, who said yesterday, Brock, my man, you got me winning big, my guy. And of course, like I just said, 4-1 yesterday in my bets. Definitely a good day. Definitely raised the stakes a little bit and, increase the, what do you guys say, units? I just call it money. Bet a little bit more money than I used to. Figured, gotta be due, right? I mean, it's been a rough couple of weeks, so we were ready. And I told you yesterday, I was feeling good about the picks. Regardless, I was feeling good about what I had on my bet slip, and we got the job done, man. 4-1, gotta love it. But anyway, guys, that's gonna do it for me. Don't forget to check me out on brockpage.com. If you guys do end up getting a membership here today on that website, just keep in mind you're going to get billed the day you sign up and then the first of every month following that. So if you do end up getting a membership here today on brockpage.com, you're going to get access to that content all the way through the end of January. I always tell folks in every single video, the earlier in the month you sign up, the better. And of course, once again, guys, if you want to get access to every single bet that I make, you're going to want to think about signing up for my board member tier. Once again, we're 2-0 in our last couple of board member tier package picks. But most importantly, board members get access to every single pick that I give out on that website all the way through the end of January. So anyway, guys, most importantly, I got to thank you for joining me right here on YouTube. I really hope you enjoyed all this great free content, all this great free information. And with that said, guys, happy Wednesday to you. Happy hump day to you. And I look forward to seeing you later on today on my website at brockpage.com.